Hi, I'm Erin Saxton, that girl from Jersey, and joining me today is Mitzi Montague-Bauer, and she's the author of Journey. And it's a mother's account of love, loss, and spiritual healing. So this is a tough interview for me. Love how I start with me.
It's okay to start with you.
I mean, honestly, who sits across from this woman and starts with herself? This girl. So let me share a story,
Okay.
and then we'll hear all about your story. But I met your husband and a business colleague at a conference, and that's when I first learned about you. And I knew it was a powerful story. And I thought, let me interview the guys first. Well, Mitzi, every attempt to interview the guys about Journey's Dream, the company we'll soon be discussing. No audio, my cameras stopped working, the lights would break down. Then all of a sudden, we're in a hotel, and now it's hours of me trying. Hours. Not winning any technical awards. And all of a sudden, the hotel lights shut down. The whole hotel shuts down. So I think, okay, so the guys look at me, we'll talk about it a little later, but they say, this means you have to come to Michigan and meet Mitzi herself. Fair enough, okay. And I'm realizing that the story we're about to talk about is a nightmare and a beautiful story. But the raw parts of this are, fair warning, raw.
Yeah.
And I realized that this wasn't about me not being able to technically produce a segment. This is about me as a mom having to face my biggest fear, which is what you did.
Yes.
So let's talk about your son, Journey.
Okay.
Tell me, who was he when you first held him in your arms? I love that part of your book.
When I first held him in my arms, I was expecting the possessive feeling of my baby, because I had had a child before, and that was the very feeling I had, was like, oh my God, this is my baby. And when I held Journey, there was that same awe and wonder, but instead of my baby, I knew he wasn't. I knew that he belonged to the world. He did not belong to me, and I knew that. And in an instant, I also knew that he would leave before me. It was fleeting, and it didn't make sense as a new mother, just giving birth, flooded with the hormones of just bliss and possessiveness. But I did. I had a knowing that he would leave. And in my mind, I just made that, he was a boy, so it was different than a girl. Boys grow up to be men, and they separate from their mothers, or maybe he would travel the world, or, marry someone, and that would become his new family. It was fleeting, and that's how I made it make sense. And then I was swept away with just the bliss of meeting him and being a new mom. But that never fully went away. That sense, that realization in that moment would surface periodically throughout his life. And, I would sometimes wonder, but it didn't really make sense at first.
I have a son as well, and he's 14. And there's times where I know what you mean. I think, will he still call me once he gets married? Or maybe he'll just like her family better than ours. And it's all very self-centered and narcissistic of me. But is that what you mean at that moment?
Right.
You were thinking that.
Right, because Breaha, my firstborn, I had that feeling of just mine. She's mine. Ah. And so I was expecting that with my son. And when I didn't have that possessive feeling, I really just knew he belonged to everyone. It was unfamiliar. And so that's how I made it make sense. Oh, she's a girl and he's a boy, and he'll, move away, or boys grew up to be different, or, more distant from their mothers, or whatever. So that's how I made it make sense in that moment. And obviously it wasn't until much later that it made sense in a different way.
Yes. The childhood, you raising them, you homeschooled both your children. Yes. And you have a stepchild also, but but you didn't homeschool Josh.
No.
It's okay. So Breaha and Journey were homeschooled, and there was a part in the book where you went to a park.
Yes.
And there were these this sense of, why should I go to the park? I mean, the children were just behaving so badly and so counterintuitive to, I try to parent this way too, like, it's opposite day, so dessert for dinner, like, and so what made you go to the park that day? Did you even know? You just drove to the park?
Well, I was really excited about a science experiment that I had, found that I thought would interest both Breaha and Journey at their levels of where they were. And it's, homeschooling's an endeavor, and one that I often felt overwhelmed by. So when I found something that I really felt would wow both of them, I was excited about it. It kind of buoyed me. So I was preparing for this science experiment, and they were bickering and, running around and, tapping their pencils, and just, I'm like, come on, you guys, let's focus. It's afternoon now, right? Let's get to school. And they weren't, mostly in a day of just bickering. And so I literally just closed my eyes. I said, be quiet. And I closed my eyes and just took some breaths. And inwardly, I heard a voice in my head that was smarter than me say, just take them to the park. And I'm like, what? Why would I do that? I have this day planned. I'm resisting. But I heard it really clearly. Just, I've grown to know that as my own, innate wisdom. Just, spoke through and just like, yeah, just go to the park. So that's why we ended up going to the park.
And what happened once you got to the park?
Well, as soon as
you can't leave them hanging.
I know, right?
I know, because I read the book. But talk to us about the park.
Okay, so, as soon as I said, hey, you guys want to go to the park? Well, their eyes lit up like, whoa, we get to go to the park instead of school. And so, boy, their attitudes changed just like that.
No bickering, same page, besties.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
So
figures.
We drove to the park, and, both the children had active imaginations, and I was accustomed to hearing about the fantasy that, world that they lived in, and I encouraged it, truthfully. They were young children, and, they just had these wild imaginations. A lot of times they would try to include me, but as an adult, I didn't usually get to be a part of it. Well,
and give us a sense right now, how old is Breaha? How old
Breaha
is
was
Journey?
Probably 10, and Journey was 7.
Okay.
So I parked the car, and we got out of the car and looked into the wooded area, and there were these glowing spheres of light. Right, I had the same reaction.
Like natural? Or they were like sun catchers that some garden club left?
I have no idea what they were.
Okay.
I still don't know. They looked like transparent balls of light floating, above the ground. Most of them were green. They ranged in size from 4 or 5 inches to a foot in diameter. Some of them were pink and blue, and not just one of us saw them. We all saw them, and we just stood there in awe. And Breaha broke the silence. She's like, I wonder if the fairies are having a party.
Oh,
right? Just 10-year-old innocence. And I kept looking for the science behind it. Like, what is going on? I'm looking around, like, what could generate such a phenomenon, right? I never did find out, but I told them, hey, we'll figure out together, like, what the science is behind this. And they both just looked at me kind of blankly, like, Mom doesn't get it, right? So gradually the balls of light started dissipating, and we moved our attention to the river, and then there was this phenomenon with the sun kind of pulsing, and it was just an otherworldly kind of day, really. So the sun was pulsing and then going dim and pulsing and going dim. I had no idea, again, what could generate such a thing. Journey thought that the sun liked our admiration and was showing off, and the kids came up with their own theories, and they weren't nearly as struck by it as I was, because it was just odd, right? So eventually, Breaha went about her activities. Journey was sitting on the riverside having a conversation with whom I didn't know, and later told us that he was talking to the sun's wife, who had appeared to him in the reflection on the river, and told him that we all have a light within us, and that is our guiding light. It's where our love and our intentions generate from. So
7 years old. 7 years old. We all have stories. We've heard of stories, or we've experienced stories where children are just, they say such profound things.
Right.
And I feel that I don't know if we pay attention to that as much as we should. But I think you did with Journey and with Breaha.
Well, To some degree. Some things like that was so, just struck me as so odd. I mean, it's still to this day, I just am baffled by that. Like, what could that have been?
Yes.
I still don't know. And I've talked to people, professors, like, we ever heard of this or what? Nothing. So I don't really know. There were a few moments in Journey's life where he said things that were just beyond, his years or what have you, that kind of stuck in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
And then particularly as he grew and became an adult and more symptomatic, then they began to have more meaning.
Excellent. I understand. So let's talk about Journey, his name. Where Journey?
Right? I don't know. I kind of wish I'd have named him something else, like James or Stay Put.
Because I was going to say that. I was like, is that bad? Maybe we manifested.
I know, kind of, right? Well,
hate to say it, but yes, stop.
Right.
Like Frozen Man or something, right? And but Journey, it's I've never, after reading this book, I've never thought a name was so more appropriate to a soul than your son and the name you gave and his dad gave to him.
I would agree. And it was just, as soon as we were pregnant, it just became obvious. I'm like, hey, I kind of like this name. Rick's like, I like that name. Whether it's a boy or girl, let's just name the baby.
I mean, are we fans of the band?
No, yeah, Journey.
No, I mean, it's a great band.
Yeah,
Like, but was there any sort of enlightenment from, like,
not the band.
Faithfully? No. Highway Run? No, nothing?
No, nothing. Yeah, but one day he did come home from school in high school, and he's like, I think his math teacher was teasing him about the hair band or whatever. He's like, did you guys name me after that band? We're like, no. And he's like, well, were you on drugs? No, neither. We just liked the name. And then, the girls liked it.
And he's a beautiful boy.
Yes.
Great looking guy. So you homeschooled him, and then he went off to college.
Well, he went to
high school. Right.
Yes,
okay, I should have said that. So we went to public high school. He made friends and had friends already, of course, played lacrosse.
Yes.
And, but let's focus on college.
Yes. So he, he was at University of Michigan studying engineering. At first, he switched his major and eventually got a degree in economics. But in the beginning, he was majoring in engineering and was just, your average know-it-all 18-year-old who was going off to school to, start his life. Had friends, took a full workload, had a part-time job. First couple of years, it was delightful, actually, just to kind of watch them, both of the kids, go out and, start to create their lives. It was exhilarating, really. And I figured we were through the most laborious part of parenting. Like,
right.
Once your kids are in college, you're like, woohoo, we launched the children, right? They're off, ready to just go about doing what they do. At some point in Journey's junior year, my mother and I went to visit him. And I noticed these, his face had these bruises and a couple cuts on him. I'm like, hey, what happened to you? And he minimized it, didn't really want to talk about it, but I learned that he had been attacked. Coming home from a party, he didn't know who the men were who attacked him, and he didn't really want to talk about it.
Was he alone?
Yes.
Okay.
So he was alone, happy, high, maybe, I don't know, his college, whatever. But he was happily just kind of leaving the party, going home, and he was beat, unconscious.
He did lose consciousness.
Yes.
Okay.
And so the scars healed, the bruises healed, but some part of him never really did. At the time, it was alarming to see, but he just continued like, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to talk about it. But then we began seeing strange behaviors. He became really obsessed with cleansing, fasting, posturing. He was fixated on his colon. The sigmoid part of the colon was broken. Something terribly was wrong. And so while he made it through college, the last semester, the last year, really his senior year, we really began to see changes in his personality.
And one one spring break, he showed up on your doorstep.
Yeah.
This is where it gets tense.
Well,
It's already.
This is where it occurred to me the severity of what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
Up until then, there were weird behaviors, but Journey's just always a quirky guy, kind of, rethinking the norm, and often that was an upgrade.
Well, and he's talking to the son's wife.
Yes, as a 7-year-old.
So, right? So, I mean, there is a certain part of it for everyone watching at home that when you have such an intellectually gifted and creative child,
Right.
there is some, leeway one gives with the path that they explore.
He had a really high IQ, was creative, musically inclined, was always rethinking the norm, essentially, and generally was the smartest person in the room. So we gave him that leeway. But when spring break of his senior year, he hitched a ride home, showed up at our door unexpectedly. I barely recognized him, and he was clearly having a psychotic episode. And we were struck. We had guests, family, friends that were visiting us for the weekend, and we were just struck with, I didn't know what to do. We confronted him. First of all, are you using drugs right now? And he said no, he wasn't. So Rex and I just tried to decide, my husband and I, should we take him to the ER? What's the right course of action? Hindsight's 20/20, but at the time we asked him. He was irritable and just, hey, back off, leave me alone. I didn't want to take him back to school. I wanted him to stay home and, get help, but he insisted on going back. It was just a few weeks before he graduated. So we took him back, and it was the hardest thing I ever did, really, just driving him back, knowing that he was so vulnerable, and, I was just fearful.
Yeah.
It was really, it was scary.
So as a mom, trying to, from my vantage point, and of course I do, it's so easy to comment on a situation from the rearview mirror perspective, right?
Sure.
But in the moment, I think we all try to control everything. And yet,
That was me.
Journey is an adult at this point.
Yes.
And a really smart one.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And shrewd. He could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at this moment when and I realize we're not purposely telling the end of the story because there's never an end to this story, okay? But we're really building this up because there is, more sadness to come. But during this moment, do you feel like this was a fork in the road? And now looking back, this is when you really lost him?
I didn't feel like I had lost him yet.
Okay.
And at that point, while I was functioning primarily from fear, and we all know that when you're fearful, your intelligence is compromised, right? And so I was, less intelligent than I would have liked to have been, and functioning from this fearful place, and definitely trying to control or help him. But even then, even through the next year, I was ever hopeful. This was not in my, it just wasn't part of my reality. He's just going to get through this. This is just a blip. We didn't have mental illness in our family. I thought it was I suspected that it was perhaps PTSD from the
Well, I want to
incident.
talk about that because, first of all, what year are we in this story?
He was a senior at university in 2009.
2009. So this is 10 years ago. And so even what we know about mental illness, the resources we have, as everyone is listening to our conversation, they have to remember what they know now is not at all what we knew then.
That's true.
We don't know the people. Changed. There's more, we accept more. It's more of an open conversation. But I will say, thankfully, you and your family come from a place where there was always that transparency. You were always very, as it seems in the book and from getting to know you, that you were quick to bring in outside help, quick to research, quick to, I want everyone to know that because I think it's important because I think that everybody thinks they would do things differently. And I'm sure you hear that, unfortunately, sometimes of, well, if it was me, or everyone's the expert.
Well, even I would have now, you know, in hindsight, looking back, I surely would have. But yes, at the time, I thought it was just temporary and that he would get through it. I was hopeful. He continued to assure us, hey, I'm okay. Or this, at one point he told me he was doing a social experiment and that, you know, everything's fine. But no doctor ever accurately diagnosed him or gave him a diagnosis, probably because he presented so differently every time, but we never had one diagnosis, but many, but never was it PTSD, which I always thought it was somehow related to that and wanted to, you know, go down that route. I looked just exhaustively for a doctor or a treatment or a medicine or a therapy, whatever could help bring him back to balance.
What was his diagnosis when they did diagnose?
He never really had one. So
okay.
I think the first hospitalization, and there were many hospitalizations, but the first one, I think they suspected schizophrenia. The second diagnosis, he was diagnosed with somatic delusion disorder, which is a situation where a person's perseverating on a body part or something's broken that there's really no evidence that that's so.
And his was the gut.
His was his gut, like the sigmoid part of the colon where the rectum meets the colon. He just kept saying that there's something wrong here.
And you would be getting him tests?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I was asking the doctors to, you know, the psychiatrists, and they were not. So we were on our own, you know, begging family practice doctors to order scans and, you know, EKGs and just everything, looking, because at that point, the rest of his conversations were pretty cogent. He was pretty clear, except in this one area, and he was so insistent. Like, really, Mom, I'm looking for like the best psychiatrist. He's like, I don't need a shrink. I need a surgeon. Like, get me, you know, help. And so it was heartbreaking, really, because he was so convinced that I don't know if he dissociated from the mental illness, but somehow for him it was just all physical. And we were all just missing the mark entirely, thinking it was in his head.
And Journey's words are in this book.
Yes.
How did you come about these? His writing is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And so he tells a story along with your story. And I will say sometimes his story, though, you sound a lot more hopeful. And he sounds way more realistic and obviously in tune to what his experience is. Where did you find these writings?
One of the ways that he managed, well, after he graduated from college, he was hospitalized in the fall, and then 3 hospitalizations pretty quickly, actually, and then just came home to live with us. And so during that time, the way that he was making sense of it was he was writing. So he, you know, posted it as a blog for half a dozen people to read, or a couple, I don't know, whoever was reading it. We were reading it.
Okay.
Friends, family, friends. And he was researching, like looking constantly for what he believed was his ailment. So he was reading and he was research and writing. So
he felt he was dying.
Right. All along he felt he was dying, and he would insist that I role play with him. Like, I'm not always going to be here. You need to get this. And I'm thinking, it's up here, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, he just always believed that he was dying, and that we just weren't getting it, that I wasn't getting it. So yeah, I was hopeful, and he was not.
But he felt what was going to take him was a disease or an illness of his gastrointestinal system.
Yes.
You were more concerned about other things, but nowhere ever did he present signs of suicide.
No.
So, or hurting other people.
No.
So why the hospital stays? And it might be, obviously it's a bigger conversation, and it's just not about Journey.
Right.
But I don't understand at the end of this part of our story, which we're not at the end, but there's all said 5,
9.
9.
9 and 4 years.
How? Why?
Well, the first 3 happened pretty quickly. He was hospitalized in Ann Arbor, was medicated and sent home. He promptly came off the medication. And when a person does that, then whatever symptomology they were experiencing prior is exacerbated. And so he was just, all his fear and terror surfaced. And so he called the ambulance on himself,
Okay.
but not for his mental health.
Oh.
He was like, something's wrong. So, at that hospitalization, he was given an injection, which is intended to last 4 weeks in the blood, and they gave him a really high dose. And so he was having severe reactions from the medication. So then a third hospitalization was he went in right away to be observed while that medication was like being tapered out of his bloodstream. So 3, just like that. I just kept trying to keep him out of the system, right? Like, let's find help. I knew that, repeated hospitalizations, every time he came back, he was further distanced, believed that he would not get well. And part of the education with someone with mental illness, this is one of the things I would love to see changed, is the doctors who treated him felt like once he was medicated and educated about his illness, in other words, he was told that this is a lifetime illness. You will need to take medication for life, much like diabetes. This is just your, tough luck kind of message. And that the best he could hope for was to manage the symptoms with medication. And it was a really hopeless message. And once they felt that they had given him that message and educated him about his illness, then it was next, because they were so busy. They were just, treating so many people. They felt that they had then succeeded. And what I realized was, okay, now he's stable. His head's above water. He's grounded in this reality somewhat. Now let's find out what is really going on. Now we're just at the beginning. We're not,
We just leveled the ground.
Yes. Now
we just got on solid ground.
Yes. Now his head's above water. Now's the time to really do the searching and the exploring what caused the divided thinking in the first place. And it may have been, for him, I think it would have been maybe trauma yoga or something that addresses PTSD, or perhaps with others it's nutrition or a spiritual emergence, or it could be any number of things. But we're not finished as soon as we medicate and get a person stable, in my opinion. That's really just the beginning. It's an important step. You have to have a stable person, but there are other ways to address, what's really going on to help them.
And just when we tried to get there, then Journey didn't comply because he would not keep taking medicine. So then we'd fall back behind.
He would go on and off and on and off, and that really wreaks havoc on a brain.
Sure.
And he was smart enough to read the pamphlet that, talks about regulations, like, I'm not a danger to myself or others, therefore I don't, you can't force me to take the medication. But of course they do, and they did. And so then he would rebel and get off of it.
Right.
So it's just he still was believing, he needed a gastro doctor.
Okay, so at this point, I think I'm going to invite Rex and Breha to join our conversation.
I like that. Yeah.
So we're going to take a little quick break. Really, it's not going to be a break because we're just going to phase in and out. But I just want to, we can talk about this part together as a family, and we'll be right back. We are back. That was like a 2-second break, as you could tell. And joining us, Mitzi and I, is her husband Rex and her beautiful daughter Breha. Mitzi, where we left off was Journey was in and out of many institutions and hospitalized. Bring us up to speed where we're at and the sad part of what happens next.
Yes. After several hospitalizations, and all during his those years where he was symptomatic, I was searching endlessly for solutions. I think I mentioned before, doctors who could help us get to the root cause of what was really happening, not a treatment that just masked the symptoms. I was really interested in like helping him be restored to health. And so I was probably a little more forceful because I was functioning from fear, and eventually Journey just got kind of tired of all of it, of being told what to do, and always valued his autonomy. But you know, I think something happens to our dignity when we're told over and over again that we're broken and we're forced into treatment. So I was looking for solutions, but by the time I really found it, well, we did send him to a treatment center in Arizona for 90 days. It was out of pocket. It was lovely. It was perfect. He started to, he was like his own self again. But the treatment there, they recommend, you know, following the protocol for a year, and they put him on nutraceuticals, things that the body recognizes, supplements and things. And it was like we had Journey back. But he did not follow the protocol. Again, just didn't think it was necessary. And he felt better. He was in communication again with some friends in California. One of his friends worked at Google. Hey, come out and stay with me. I need help with my calculus. And he had burned so many bridges back home in Michigan that a fresh start seemed appealing to him. And I think he just felt, oh, I'm fine. I'm good. I'm better.
Breha, from your perspective, I mean, it's one thing to be a parent, but you're the big sister, and you and Journey are very close. What's going on in your mind through this period of time? What were you experiencing?
A lot. All of our lives, Journey and I were like twin souls. So forgive me, I didn't think I'd get emotional right off the gate here, but we came into this world to do something together, and I just knew that. From the time we were little kids playing in the woods, I just had a sense that we're here on this earth to do something important together. So being with Journey through this process was really painful, because I couldn't save him from it, right? I wanted to somehow pull him out of this pain or the struggle that he was experiencing, and I couldn't. So I had to kind of surrender to meeting him there. And I'm grateful that most of the time I was able to do that. It was not easy to just let all of my fears and judgments melt away, because I had plenty. But I think most of the time I was able to do that, to just really be present with him right where he was and see him for the being I knew he was, and we could connect kind of on that heart level. And so I was, 25 and just married and starting a big career and just bought a house, and there were times where he pushed mom and dad away and I was the only one he'd talk to. And it felt like a lot of responsibility on me to take care of him, to talk to the doctors. And it was a short period of maybe 6 months when he was the hospital he was in was closer to my home. And so I went there several times a week after work, and it was very challenging to try to manage all of that in my kind of like new budding life that was pretty happy, right? To have this dichotomy of like just trying so hard to help my brother and not knowing exactly how to do that.
So much of this in such a young marriage, that's intense. How did you all navigate that?
I'm very blessed to have an amazing husband, and he and I had known each other for several years. We met when we were 21, so we knew each other for a long time before we got married, and he had had the opportunity to get to know my family relatively well, and knew Journey a little bit before his symptomology started to present itself. So he was a grounding place in so many ways for me, because it wasn't emotionally triggering for him the way it was for us. He loved and cared for Journey, but didn't know him yet intimately like we do. So he was able to love me from that grounded place that wasn't as emotionally involved, and really just supported me in doing and being whatever I needed.
That's wonderful. Rex, yes. You and I briefly talked a while back off camera about the day that Journey was attacked at college. Yes. And I asked you directly if you thought this was as a result of the PTSD. And then we got interrupted. So now that I have you, do you think that we would still have Journey here with us today had that attack while he was at college happened?
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think so. I think that was a very instrumental point in his life when he was attacked. We don't know. We were never able to really isolate it. In the medical field, wasn't able to determine it exactly, as that he might have had brain injury or something. But it was such substantial shifts in his behavior, and he was so brilliant prior to that, and he never had trouble navigating his thoughts. He never had trouble navigating relationships, interacting with people. I mean, he was loved by almost everyone that ever met him and just felt uplifted by him. And when he started showing the symptoms, yes, I do think it's directly related to the attack, certainly. And from that attack, it seemed like the symptomology started to occur. And when Breaha was mentioning, and we were talking about how, Mitzi had talked about how he had regained his old self again when he was in Sedona. I mean, it was so drastic. We were on vacation when we talked to him, and it was like, wow, the old journey's back.
Yeah.
And as you can understand, that was a very difficult time for all of us. And there was this process that we were moving in and out of, as was he. The space of feeling like he was cogent and he could understand and he was speaking clearly and it was our boy again. And then he would go back into these other places and the medicine and all the different variables. I'd love to just have Journey here, you know, graduated, a family with children, but that's not the case. And there was a bigger unfolding taking place here that we didn't have an awareness of at the time.
Mitzi, why don't you walk us through what happens next?
Well, about 4 years into his symptomology, he had called the hospital, an ambulance for himself, and it was really, out of the 9 hospitalizations, 1 of 2 that were voluntary. So he had actually called for help and was in the hospital for 2.5 weeks, and then was discharged to a step-down treatment, and a treatment center, and he was still there. He had asked Rex to spend some time with him the day before, on a Saturday. They spent time together. He was kind of his old self. And then the following morning, on a Sunday morning, I got a visit. Rex was at church by himself. I was home writing, and I got a visit from 2 police officers and a priest. Just never a good sign, you know, that combination. And they let me know that Journey had died that morning. He had stepped off a building and died. And it was just unbelievable to me. It was just obviously mind-numbing and shocking and devastating. Never, ever in my wildest dreams saw it coming.
Do we think it was suicide? Was there a note? I mean, you spent the day before with him. Did you have any indication that?
Absolutely none. I mean, I spent the day with him. He was always trying to do something that would resolve this conflict that he was feeling inside, physically, mentally, emotionally. He was always, regardless of what everyone else, not everyone, our family and a few select few would see him as being, we prayed and we knew he was going to heal. And he felt that as well. And so that day, he had asked me to come and do nose rings for him. And he thought that if he got the just perfect nose ring, then he would recover. And that day was, it was etched in my memory as being, there were signs of him feeling a lot better, and he was hopeful. I mean, we had an apartment set up that he was getting an upgrade in a nice place. He was talking about, I was going to see him on Tuesday, and this is on a Saturday, I think, and then I was going to see him on Tuesday and take him into his new apartment, get his stuff moved, and he had a sense of excitement, but there was also just something else that I wasn't able to catch, and I didn't know what it was, and it was hard. I mean, I was doing my best as a father watching my son, but he was having difficulty navigating, and he was on 5 different medications at the time, you know.
Yeah, let's talk about this, right? So Journey was in a step-down facility, which means what exactly for people at home that don't know?
It It's a transition from a hospital to home, and primarily the objective is that it's a place where people have their freedom during the day, but they sleep at this was called Bridges in Lansing. They sleep there, but they have to be there in the morning for their medication, and then they have to be back at 8 p.m. And so therefore someone's regulating their medication intake. So he'd have to be there in the morning, and then he would have freedom all day long. So he could be gone for 12 hours as long as he was back in the evening, take his medication, and slept there. So, and usually that is a 2 or 3 week period where they're transitioning before they go home. So he was there. We know that he was on his medication, and later I learned, I didn't know at the time, but later I learned that he was on 5 psychiatric medications. 2 antipsychotics, an anti-seizure, an antidepressant, an anti-anxiety, and a heavy dose of Benadryl. And so he, was just on a lot of medication. Essentially, he died from a brain injury. He came off the building and landed on his feet with his hands out.
The lady who had witnessed it ran out, and he was laying there, and she looked at him and said, "Well, gosh, what can I do to help you?" And he says, "I just need someone to help me get up."
Wow.
Literally. And
Can you help me stand up?
yeah. And
then he said, "My blood pressure is rising."
well, then the first responder came, and that was a gentleman that said that he thought he was almost as if he was trying to stick the jump, and he said he couldn't have jumped from 6 stories. The damage in his body didn't reflect it. He said maybe 2 stories, and that was part of the conversation. Well, then when the lady was there, and then the responder asked him, "Did you step off the building?" And Journey said, "Yes. I mean, that was reasonable. He did step off the building." But there was never a discussion as to why he stepped off the building.
If she had only asked why.
Yeah, it was a man.
And he died.
actually,
Oh, if he had only
He
asked
died
why.
shortly after that.
But he did say, he said to the first responder, "You need to check my blood pressure because it's going up right now."
Could you call for help? Yeah.
And so we checked it right away, and then I think within 5 minutes he had passed.
I know when I saw Journey, we went to the hospital that night, that he had died, and saw his body laying there on the gurney. And I didn't know how to say goodbye, right? Like, how do you say goodbye? And I just used some of the tools that I knew. I breathed, right? Like the breath just helps you move through anything. And I asked, like, okay, now what? This is not what I expected from my life, right? Like, Journey and I were here to do something. Like, what the heck are you doing here? And I just had this inspiration to tell him, look, I'm going to heal all the pain and the grief and the anger and the sorrow inside of myself about this situation and your death, so that I can see you in the beauty of my life, so that I can look at the sunrise and I see Journey, and so that I can look into the eyes of my future children and see your smiling eyes. And so that's the commitment I made to Journey, was I'm going to heal myself so that I can feel joy and share this life with you still. And I didn't take that commitment lightly, and it required turning full into all of the pain. And I'm so grateful to have had the support and have the support that I have with my husband and my parents and our family and our friends, to have a safe place and the time to just feel the depths of that and look at those images in my own mind that were scary to me, like him falling off of a building. You know, those are things, the moments where I wondered if he was in pain or suffering alone. Just, I embraced him in that period of time, and still now, you know, I still have those moments where those feelings of just profound grief. I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I look at my children and I see so much of my brother in them, and it brings me joy, and it sometimes really triggers my sadness, and it gives me another opportunity to breathe and to heal.
I'm not so sure I could do what you're all doing. I honestly think that I would die right on the spot.
I thought I was going to die too.
I would. And I don't know a mom or a parent or a sibling out there that would not be able to empathize with the position that you all are in. And instead of just wallowing like I would be in the fetal position for years, or quite frankly, I think I probably would have to end it for me. Like, I don't know if I would find the strength. Eric's I'm a single mom. So it's a little bit of a different dynamic. I'd like to think I'd be strong enough to stay around, but I don't know. And so I give you all a lot of credit, and I just feel like I need to share that honesty with you, because I don't know anybody braver than all of you right now. And on a more positive note, you guys have not only survived this, but you're thriving, and now you're helping others. So why don't we talk a little bit briefly about Journey's Dream? What is Journey's Dream? What does it do? Who is it for?
I can say originally kind of where it started for me, and then yes, I think it would be lovely if you took it from there, Breha. I did all this research, so I had all of these solutions that it felt a little bittersweet, like, oh, here's this doctor in Chicago who could have probably helped, or who may have helped, or here's this treatment, or what have you. But it also felt that I had that information, and I kept wondering what would have happened if I had known this in the beginning, when Journey was open to receiving help, when he was asking for help. If I had known this doctor then, what would there have been a different outcome? And so that was the impetus for me to do something with, was the impetus to write the book. It was the impetus to start Journey's Dream, so that we could have a collection of resources so people could find these things more easily than I was able to.
Journey and I were here for something. Now I have a little bit of space, right? It's been 6 years since Journey died. And yeah, we're here doing this together. It doesn't look like how I thought it would look, because I really like hugging his neck and like laughing and joking and being together. But I also know that I would not be sitting here as the executive director of a mental health nonprofit if this hadn't happened. It's not the life that I had kind of really imagined for myself. But I can't imagine being anywhere else, doing anything else. It feels more right and more on purpose than anything I've ever done in my life, in addition to raising my children. So I have a sense that this is what we're here to do. Journey gave us a profound, selfless, brave gift through living his life through this mental health journey, challenge, experience that he had, apparently, and through his death, have inspired this body of work. And the more people we talk to about Journey's Dream and what we're here to do, the more people are inspired. And really, the organization is here to convene, develop, and share innovative and effective solutions for mental health. And we are passionate about changing the narrative. Yes. People need to know that there's hope. We have a phenomenal co-founder, Mark Haddis, and he has a different story. And we'll be excited, hopefully, at some point to talk about that with you guys. But his story is a story of recovery. And we know mental health recovery is absolutely possible. And so we're here to help people, one, know that, and two, connect with the resources so that can be their story.
And if people wanted to learn more about Journey's Dream, how can they all find you?
Journeysdream.org. And the book is on Amazon.
I thank you all for your time, and I hope we help a lot of people just by this interview alone. Thanks for being here.
It's our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.